and is familiar with international affairs and has a PowerPoint to present to us. And that just came on the screen. Michael is a surgeon, and he's been to the Ukraine training field surgeons on how to take care of medical concerns on the battlefield, and of course, every place in Ukraine, because those surgeons are in there when a building is bombed or things like that happen. He has an unusual perspective, close up and personal. So I'm not going to speak anymore. Welcome, Dr. Michael Baker.
Thank you very much for such a gracious intro. And, you know, you might see, some of you have seen me talk before about Ukraine. You might see a few slides that you know from previously. You might cover some ground that maybe is new to you. But I'd like to start a little bit with the history of what happened in Ukraine. It's the 3rd anniversary now, plus a month or two. And I have been there a few times. It changes your opinion. Those of you who have not heard me lecture on topics like this, there's a couple things that make me different from a lot of speakers. First of all, I try to bring in some of my friends. I met a lot of interesting people in my 2 careers, medicine and the military. And so if I can bring them in, I try to bring them in. The other thing is, you know, I really like old movies. So you might see a couple of movie clips tonight for fun, because I put them in here where I think they're pertinent. So the question is, what's next? You know, every week it's going to be a ceasefire. You know, Trump says, hey, Vladimir, stop it. So, you know, I'm a retired general trauma surgeon. I'm a retired admiral in the US Navy. And so how did I get there? I want to take you on this trip with me. But first of all, why did Russia invade Ukraine, which was a sovereign country with guaranteed borders? Putin said NATO is getting too close, which is nonsense. If you look at the map, the dark blue colors here are NATO countries. So you can see Spain and France and England and Germany and Poland. And the ones that are labeled 1 through 14 are prior Soviet republics like Czechoslovakia. All these countries, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they rushed to join NATO. They couldn't wait to join NATO. And so starting, you know, after 1997, a lot of them joined NATO, because over here on the right, you can see the Russian bear, which is always hungry. We will use that over and over. So Ukraine is here. I just put up a red star on your screen. Hopefully everybody can see this okay. There's a border here with Latvia and Estonia actually border Russia. So I'm not sure how much closer NATO can get than actually sharing a border with Russia. So among all the many other lies that Putin tells, this is one that holds no water. So what's Vladimir Putin's legacy? His special military operation. I'll give you a little taste. It's really a war. I don't know why he's calling it a special military operation, which is pretty crazy. So Europe's been at peace for over 75 years. How did this happen? Well, you know, I always use a little humor here. I quote Mark Twain, who said, God created war so that Americans would learn geography. And I have to tell you, I'm going to show you my geography lesson, my personal one. But it certainly, you know, will apply to all of you as well. You will see. So February 22nd, 2022, they massed troops on the border of Ukraine. They invaded a sovereign country. They used the world's 2nd or 3rd most powerful army, depending on how you stack it up and measure it. They violated the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which was a security guarantee. So when Putin talks about security guarantees and Trump talks about security guarantees, guess what? It was signed by Russia, the US, UK, Britain, China, and France to guarantee their borders, or guarantee their sovereignty, guarantee their borders. And guess what? He invaded anyway. So, you know, anything the Russians sign doesn't mean anything unless we can put troops or some other real security guarantee into Ukraine, which was a sovereign country before he started nibbling away at it in 2014. So what did that look like? You know, Ukraine is fighting our war. So here's a taste of what it looked like.
When Vladimir Putin invaded a peaceful Ukraine, his brutal shock troops committed hideous war crimes against women, children, and the elderly. He bombed cities, towns, and villages.
So, you know, now they're blowing up infrastructure. Every time I hear of a bombing, it's an apartment building, it's a hospital, it's a school. So Ukraine was invaded on multiple fronts. The actual battle map, if you look at how the invasion went down, there were 7 Russian army groups came from different directions, as you can see on this map at the top at Kyiv, which was going to fall. Remember, it will fall in 2 weeks. Zelensky will flee, the army will collapse, Kharkiv will collapse, several army groups heading to Dnipro, one towards Odessa. So we're going to give you a little more geography lesson here in a minute. Millions of civilians fled. You know, they were out of there because, you know, there were a lot of people in the east, particularly, ran from the Russians. And
on February 24th, Ukrainian families woke up to their country under siege. Missile strikes and military attacks destroyed homes, schools, and businesses, putting countless lives at risk. In the days that followed, millions of people were forced to flee their homes in search of safety, setting off the largest refugee emergency in Europe since World War II. In the first 6 weeks of the conflict alone, a quarter of Ukraine's population were forced to flee their homes, finding safety in other regions of Ukraine or crossing borders into neighboring countries. 90% of those who've been forced to flee are women and children. Those who fled but remained displaced within the borders of Ukraine are known as internally displaced people, or IDPs. Many were driven from their homes by heavy shelling and fighting, and face the devastating impacts the war has had on their country and its infrastructure every day. Because of these dangerous and unlivable conditions, millions have been forced into neighboring European countries to find safety. In 2022, the UN Refugee Agency recorded approximately 8 million refugees from Ukraine across Europe.
And there have been more since. And I can't imagine having to flee my home. And I certainly can't imagine a quarter of the population having to pack up and run for it. Can you imagine that several million people? So how did Ukraine, which was going to fall in 2 weeks, how did they hold back the Russian army? The Russians had 10-to-1 air superiority. Russia has 3 to 4 times the population, depending on how you measure some other little big lie about Nazis in Ukraine. We have to fight the Nazis, and they're willing to die for it now. For now, it's been 3 years, and they've really bought in. We'll talk more about that. But, you know, the Ukrainians fought back for their homes, and that's a big deal. This is
Freedom Square, Kharkiv, Russia's so-called liberation. A local government building and everything around it hit by a missile. An opera house and concert hall were also hit this morning.
Kharkiv and Kyiv are the most important targets for Russia now. The terror is aimed at breaking us, breaking our resistance. That is why the defense of the capital is the key priority for the state.
For now, the Ukrainian resistance has slowed the advance on Kyiv, but according to Western officials,
everyone underestimated the Ukrainians' willingness to fight. And, you know, when you look at the pictures, you know, it wasn't just young men of draft age. The Ukrainians were united about defending their homes. They were not going to be rolling over. Check out these people drawing their weapon.
The cities under siege, brave Ukrainians aren't just the ones wearing uniforms. Volunteer fighters, civilians, armed with assault rifles, patrolling central Kyiv, ready to defend their country and protect their families. This video shows a Ukrainian throwing a homemade Molotov cocktail at a Russian fuel truck. And this video, posted on Facebook but not shot by NBC News, shows a Ukrainian man kneeling before a Russian tank, an attempt to stop it in its path. Other civilians seen handing out weapons. The former president of Ukraine calling on anyone who can to join the fight. As families flee, so many others staying to fight.
Boy, isn't that the truth?
Ukraine's
So fighting for your home is different than being an invader who's fighting to kill and to loot. Remember, they did a lot of looting, taking back washing machines and stuff to Russia because they'd never seen them before. Napoleon stated the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. Great history. And here's one of my favorite young warriors, a teenage Ukrainian drone pilot. He is drone pilot #1 in the Ukrainian Air Force. the first week of the invasion. 15 years old.
Last summer, Andriy Pokorasa saved up enough money to buy a drone. 15-year-old practiced flying every day at his home near Kyiv. But in February, Pokorasa's town suddenly found itself on Russia's warpath. Russian tanks were spotted heading their way. Ukraine's military didn't know the exact location, so they began looking for a drone pilot. More than 1,000 civilians answered the call to help, including the youngest volunteer, Pokorasa. The Russians were only a couple of kilometers away, but the military needed their exact coordinates. Pokorasa was the only experienced drone pilot in town. Before long, he spotted an armored column of Russian vehicles. His father sent the images and coordinates to the military, and the Russian column was destroyed.
This is my home. I didn't want to see what was happening in
saved.
occupied territories.
Я не хотів, щоб з моїм домом було те ж саме, що з домами людей.
He's credited with over 100 kills of tanks and armored vehicles. Drone pilot number one, Ukrainian drone force. I mean, 15 years old, pretty impressive. So Ukrainians never give up. That's part of what I want to teach you tonight. They will never, ever give up. They know what it's like to live under Russian Soviet rule. They'll never give up. This is also exemplified by the response of the garrison on Snake Island. Snake Island's out in the Black Sea. There's an 18-man garrison at a radio and radar station there. They were told to surrender by the battle cruiser Moskva with a lot of heavy weapons. And I was actually able to find the radio transmission and get it translated. I am a Russian military ship. Put down your weapons. You're armed. So, enough said. 18 guys are facing off the battle cruisers, which, by the way, got sunk a week or two later by Ukrainian drone boats. Isn't that amazing? They're fighting back. It led to a postage stamp, which was fairly famous. He's giving the universal signal to the Moskva. And actually, it's one of my favorite T-shirts that I brought home for one of my kids. So they'll never give up. So how did I get involved? Why did a retired general surgeon go to Ukraine and lead ATLS training teams 5 times during a war? I'm a little slow to be running to bomb shelters. I'm getting a little older, but I had a second parallel career that I think is pertinent. It was mentioned earlier by Ellis. Thank you so much. After I did my surgery training and my fellowship, I decided I needed to serve my country. And I looked at all kinds of different opportunities, the public health service, the Peace Corps, and I read that the Navy was very short of general surgeons. So I went down and signed up. My kids love this photo. They say it's pre-kid photo of dad because he still has hair. He lost it after he had all his kids. My first promotion photo, I was promoted to lieutenant commander after a while. 2.5 stripes on my dress blues, and you can see it's a fairly formal uniform without a lot of color. And I was only going to do a couple of years and then be out, but they kind of seduced me into it. So I wound up spending a longer time in uniform. And as mentioned, I did pick up some awards and some ribbons, and I have a warfare pin for River and Coastal Patrol. It's very unusual for a physician. But I was very lucky. I had some very interesting mentors who said, you got to learn how to do this stuff. You'll be more valuable. The other thing, as I mentioned, I met a lot of interesting people as a result of my time in uniform. One of them is Malcolm Nance, an intelligence operative from the Navy. He was lecturing at the Commonwealth Club in August 2022. And of course, we had to take a selfie at the end of his lecture. I got his book, and, we went out to talk, and we must have talked for 3 or 4 hours. I was really tired when I got home late at night, but we talked for a couple hours. We had a good time. I didn't think much of it. He had been fighting in Ukraine since the war started. After a week after the war, he went to Ukraine. He put on a uniform and joined the Ukrainian military. He was home for this book tour, and immediately after this, he went back to Ukraine. The coincidence is that the following week, I was asked to travel to Ukraine to teach ATLS. which is Advanced Trauma Life Support. I'm going to give you a little intro to that. I was a certified instructor, but also a course director. And that's really important to the 5 courses that we taught, as I'll explain. Advanced Trauma Life Support is an American College of Surgeons course we've been teaching since 1980 because there was an orthopedic surgeon whose plane crashed. Family got what he thought was horribly disorganized, terrible medical care. He said, we have to have a structured course. And so American College of Surgeons put it together, sponsors it, and certifies it. Our sponsor for this was the International Medical Corps and USAID. Remember USAID? Trump administration just gutted it and fired everybody around the world, which is a horrible decision. Anyway, we're training medical providers to manage acute injuries, not the guys on the battlefield, the first contact like the medics, but we're teaching the guys a step or two back in the field hospital or the county hospital type place, how to take care of these injuries the way we do it in the US, and giving them a structured way to do it. So off to Kyiv in August 2022, not long after that lecture to teach ATLS. So what was interesting, I had a Zoom meeting with my 6 team members. And after I got to know everybody on the Zoom meeting, I said, you know, it's kind of interesting. We're all prior military, and probably a good idea considering that we're going to a war zone. You know, we've all been there before a little bit. So my team was all prior military. Everybody kind of had an idea what to do. We were told to travel light. You get 1 backpack and a small rolling bag, no camis, don't wear your Navy or Marine Corps t-shirts. I had to leave all my gear at home that I love to wear all the time. If you ever see me in the gym, I'm always in a Navy t-shirt just about. I get to Ukraine, hard trip. You know, you fly to Munich, you fly from Munich to Poland. And when you get to Poland, you stay overnight. Then the next morning, you take the train down or a van down to the border. You dismount and you walk across the border because there was 10 miles of ammunition and fuel trucks and food trucks lined up, and it would have taken us 3 days. So we walk across the border. We're picked up by a USAID van on the other side, and we're taken to this country at war. It kind of felt safe, but there are a lot of things to see, as I'll show you. Checkpoints, fighting posts, armed guards, air raid sirens, bomb shelters. When you're driving down the road, so this is, you know, this could be a fighting post, but it's also what's called a serpentine. You see one here on the left side of your picture, one on the right. It makes vehicles slow down. So we're approaching one here. They don't like you to take pictures, but if you've ever been on a military base, you go left, right, left. It makes you slow down to about 5 miles an hour so that when you get to the end of the serpentine, the greeters are there. It's like Walmart. You go there and here's the greeters, and they probably will search your van or your truck to make sure that everything is what they expect. So when I got there, another interesting thing was we had an app for air raids installed on our phone.
Old school air raid alerts are sent to the streets by an official pushing a button. Now that same official also pushes a second button that triggers the app, which often alerts people faster than the sirens.
Attention, air raid alert. Proceed to the nearest shelter. Don't be careless. You're overcome.
Anybody recognize that voice? Some of you may have heard this story already from me.
Attention, the air alert is over.
So Mark Hamill paid to develop this app, brought it to Ukraine personally, gave it to the Ukrainians, and everybody has it on their phone. It gives you about an extra minute of time to get to the bomb shelter when you need to. So boy, was I relieved when we finished and came home. It was stressful to have to roll out of bed and run down the stairs to the bomb shelter. Because by the way, you don't take elevators, you know, because if they're bombing you, you might be stuck in the elevator. So, you know, it was stressful. I hadn't been in a war zone, you know, I was a little rusty for doing that kind of stuff. And I was happy when I came home. Then after I got home, I was asked to return and teach in Odessa. That was interesting, as I'll tell you about getting to Odessa. There's a whole nother tour of Europe because I had to fly through Romania and then go across Moldova to get there, as I'll show you on the map. Then I was asked a couple of weeks after that to teach in Izmail. So basically, you know, it was a couple of weeks on, a couple of weeks off. Izmail's down on the Danube, as I'll show you. Then I went back to Dnipro. That was tough because it was that same flight to Munich, then to Poland, then to the train at the border, 12 hours to Kyiv overnight, another 10 or 12 hours to Dnipro, depending on, the bombing and stuff. Sometimes you have to stop the train and exit. And most recently, I was in Venezia. So why was this done this way? Well, as they got me involved in this more and more, as a course director, the first 2 or 3 courses, we were looking for talented Ukrainian physicians who really got it, and they could teach ATLS, and they were doing a great job. And then the last 2 times I had them teach in Dnipro and Venezia, and my job was to certify them. And in fact, the last 2 times, I didn't even have any of the rest of the team. It was just me with my Ukrainian interpreters and staff, and I'll give you a little feel for that. So geographically, Ukraine is here in the middle. The yellow parts were invaded by Russia, but the Ukrainians kicked them out and saved Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Odessa. The red is still held by the Russians. So I put a blue arrow up here near Kyiv. So that was my first teaching event. We were identifying some potential instructors. Dnipro is down here. Odessa is over here by the Black Sea. Ismail is where the Danube enters into the Black Sea. I didn't even know the Danube entered. I told you I learned a lot of geography. And last but not least was Venezia, when I certified the last 20 or so instructors. It was really a tremendous experience. And in nation building, when you bring something like this to the nation, you want them to be able to take it over and do it themselves. So we have a once a month video Zoom call if they have questions or concerns with instructors and the staff at Harvard, Humanitarian Initiative, and other of the sponsors, so that we can kind of keep the teaching thing going, which has been really great for everybody. So, but you can see over here, down here, when I got to the 2 stars down here, Odessa and Ismail, you got to go across Romania and through Moldova. So now I've been in Chisinau, Moldova. Oh, well, interesting. The Russians are pushing really hard on Kharkiv. I have friends that live there. They get bombed a lot. Their hospitals sometimes lose their lights and power. They're pushing hard in the Bakhmut area towards Dnipro, and they're pushing hard towards Kherson and Odessa. The Russians are grinding it out, 1,000 casualties a week to get a kilometer or 2 of ground. If this is all they got in 3 years, there's a problem. So what's it like to teach in Ukrainian? I always had a skilled interpreter. You can see my guy right here. He was fabulous. He went over my slides every night to make sure that the Ukrainian translations were culturally appropriate as well as linguistically appropriate, because this was the first lecture. So unlike what some of you might remember from school many years ago, where your professor stood up there with an 8x14 yellow pad and droned on for an hour or 2, we do a 20-minute didactic lecture, 1 or 2 of them, and then we follow up with a hands-on demonstration, usually involving a mannequin. And then we do all hands-on skill stations with the mannequin. We don't use live animals anymore. It was done with ATLS initially, but mannequins are fine. And actually here, when I teach it locally, in addition to the mannequins, we use a rack of spare ribs so that when guys are putting in a chest tube, they can get the feel, which is a little better even than the mannequin. So here I am doing a skill station with the mannequin, telling these guys what they're going to do in the skill station. They are smart. They are on top of their game. They all studied. They wanted this very badly. They had been trying to get ATLS since 2014. My interpreter back to us in this photo, but always one of them right there with me. Here we are doing a skill station. My doctor is putting a chest tube. First, I made her draw out the landmarks, the ribs, the clavicle. She's putting a chest tube in through a fake little membrane, so that she understands how to do it. And then they do a surgical airway, do a couple other procedures, and my interpreter's right there by my right shoulder. So that's what I did. 5 tours in Ukraine, selected the best Ukrainian physicians taking ATLS to become instructors. We trained them, and then we certified them. Am I going back anytime soon? People ask me that all the time. Anyway, Ukraine has stopped and stalemated the Russian army for 3 years. They sank half of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, including the Moskva, the flagship. They've revolutionized drone warfare, starting with a 15-year-old kid, but now they're leading the way. But they're tired. So my impression is the war impact on Ukraine, they've probably had over 400,000 military casualties. I've read estimates of 28,000 civilian casualties. This is about a month old, so I heard the numbers are a little higher. I didn't get to look them up today, but it's a lot of people. We talked about displaced people, 14 million, some internally displaced, some have left the country for Poland, for Germany, for the US. What else? Well, they've lost 20% of their territories. You know, that area of Donbass and Luhansk. 6 million are living under Russian occupation, including the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is crazy. There's a lot of generational trauma. With all those casualties, everybody's had, a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, an uncle, a neighbor, killed or injured. Their infrastructure and their economy are devastated. You never know what the Russians are going to bomb, an opera house, an apartment building, a train line. But they've been knocking out power plants. And it's hard to defend against ballistic missiles because they come in real fast. And, to have no light, electricity, or heat in the winter of Central Europe is pretty tough. So it's been tough on them. So what's Russia like 3 years later? I have a close friend who's on the faculty and teaches about Russia. She speaks Russian. She was born in Russia. As of about a month ago, the Center for the Institute of the Study of War says about 850,000 Russians have been killed or wounded. This morning I looked it up. It's closer to over 900,000 now. 20,000 vehicles destroyed. That's mostly armored vehicles like BMPs. And over 10,000 Russian tanks have been destroyed. That's a lot of tanks. That's a lot of armored divisions. And 1 million Russian men fled conscription. They've lost an entire generation of educated Russian men who fled to other countries to get away from it. They don't want to be drafted. But the rest of the ones who didn't flee are willing. Why? They're willing to die in his war. Well, a lot of people, particularly in the provinces of Russia, outside of Leningrad and Moscow, there's no hope at home. It's a devastating poverty. That's why a lot of those guys have never seen washing machines or widescreen televisions or anything. So they have strong financial incentives coupled with propaganda. And the propaganda was very successful in, hyping this war against Nazis who were somehow going to affect Russia. It's crazy. Also, if you were a prisoner, and I've read that about 80,000 prisoners were released and sent to the battlefield, you could get your crimes struck off the books if you survive. What else is different? Well, they criminalized dissent and they closed down all the media, and anybody who says anything negative goes to jail. All the opposition, particularly politicians, are quiet. There is no free speech. And they've reforged Russia as a nation of war. So one of the things they've done, as you see in this picture, is all kids get an hour of military training every day, starting in kindergarten. Are you kidding me? I'm old enough to remember when we had to get on under our desk in case of a nuclear attack. But, I can't picture putting these kids in hoods. I guess they could be future ICE agents. I don't know. But anyway, it's crazy. They all get trained every day for some time. Government spending 50% of the Russian budget on war-related matters, which mean the economy is not doing so good. Incomes are down. Putin cannot give in. If he gives in, it means he lost, right? So everybody probably just keep their head down and their mouth shut, according to my Russian friends. You don't talk about it. You don't criticize it. You go to work. If they turned your bagel factory into an armaments factory, that's what you go do. And if they don't pay you a lot, take it or leave it. So what happens if Putin's successful? We got to look at this from several points of view. Here's a map that I showed you earlier of that part of Europe. The darker countries are NATO countries, now including Sweden and Finland, who immediately saw the light. There's something on here. I'm putting up a big arrow for you all. There's a red dot on your map between Lithuania and Poland. Many of you may not know what that is, but it's Kaliningrad. For a surgeon like me, we would call that a metastasis. It shouldn't be there. It's in your liver. Why is there a metastasis called Kaliningrad between Lithuania and Poland? It's a Russian naval base with nuclear submarines and nuclear weapons. And the bear is hungry. So more about that in a minute. But just because I told you I love old movies, Sean Connery sailed his sub from Kaliningrad in the movie Hunt for Red October, one of my favorites. Boy, was he good.
This is your captain. It is an honor to speak to you today, and I'm honored to be sailing with you on the maiden voyage of our motherland's most recent achievement. Once more, we play our dangerous game. A game of chess against our old adversary, the American Navy. The order is engage for silent drive.
Aye, sir. Ballast control. Open out the doors.
Yes, move out of doors.
Diving command. Engage Caterpillar and secure main engines. Doors opening, Captain.
We will pass through the American patrols, past their sonar nets, and lay off their largest city, and listen to their rock and roll, while we conduct missile drills. A great day, comrades. We sail into history.
Caterpillar engaging.
Caterpillar engaging.
They're very patriotic guys. So I don't know what to tell you, but Russians are very patriotic. So, it's all about Russia. Russia invaded a sovereign country. Now, what's happened? Well, Trump interdicted the supplies and weapons and ammo to Ukraine once. And what did that do? Ukraine is really fighting for us and for NATO. And if we abandon Ukraine, boy, this is going to be bad.
Nie mamy dzisiaj żadnego powodu, aby sądzić, że są to tylko słowa. Zresztą meldunki, które napływają z granicy, z naszego hubu, wiesiące też potwierdzają zapowiedzi strony amerykańskiej. I to oczywiście stawia Europę, Ukrainę i oczywiście Polskę w sytuacji.
That's an understatement. Tusk is very good. Poland is waking up. They know it's coming. And back to what happens if Putin is successful. I just talked about Kaliningrad, right? If I were looking at this strategically, I would think that my next targets, knowing Putin, Moldova, where I just put up this next arrow, is one. There are Russian troops that have been stationed there for decades, just waiting for the word. I know he's looking at the Baltic states. He frequently says the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, belong to Russia in his mind. So those would probably be the first three big targets for the bear, which is always hungry. And then I'm really worried about Finland. Finns are smart. They've been preparing for this, believe it or not, for 40 years. A lot of their schools and backup stuff is underground, and because of the bombings and stuff, and they're kind of ready. But the bear is hungry, and it's just very, very worrisome that the bear is so hungry. So now we got Trump and Project 2025. It's been such an interesting 100 days. Don't get me started. We are going to talk a little bit about it, but he's bashing our allies, separating the U.S. from our best friends. Why? He's breaking our pledges, like to NATO, forsaking our alliances, like with Ukraine, and abandoning Ukraine to the Russians. What did he say? If they don't want peace, I'll just let Russia eat all of Ukraine, even though that ain't happening. So when you forsake our alliances and you drop support for Ukraine and NATO, this is a bad thing. NATO has stood up against the Russians now since the end of World War II. Otherwise, we'd still have a Soviet Union, and a lot of those other countries would be part of the Soviet Union. We're exposing Europe to Russian aggression. This is a bad thing. Bashing our allies. He's threatening Canada and Greenland with annexation, right? We had a Canadian election. It's something crazy every day, but, it's very distracting. Wants to take back the Panama Canal. This week, he said we should at least let our ships go through for free. It was ours to start with. Tariffs, levying tariffs on our best trading partners, Canada and Mexico. How's that affecting the price of food in your grocery stores and cars on your lots? We'll talk about that if we have time. Leaving the World Health Organization, WHO. that's going to be a disaster. I can't tell you how important some of those programs are. You know, PEPFAR was started by George Bush, and it saved millions of lives around the world from HIV. And now we're going to have HIV coming back along with drug-resistant tuberculosis. And guess what? Those things can come here on airplanes. We're leaving the Paris Climate Accords. So pretty important in terms of what I read in the news or see on the news every night with the storms everywhere across the Midwest, everywhere, not to mention all the wildfires everywhere. We closed USAID and cut off aid for hunger, poverty, disease control. What a nightmare. It was the best investment we ever made as a country. And we're breaking into and destroying agencies and giving their information to our adversaries. Wow. Cui bono. The funny part of this is I was tricked into taking Latin as a 9th grader, and I had to take 3 years. I only remember a few phrases, but cui bono means who benefits. And I think you could figure this out. Russia. Russia's benefiting big time. They're celebrating every night. They've got a director of national security here who echoes Russian talking points. You have a president and vice president who are totally in Russia's pocket. I'm not sure why, but I have some theories. Ukraine fighting our war. And if we abandon it, it's a disaster. This one. So let's go on. So I'm worried that all these things are happening. They're all in danger. Our government's getting disabled. They fired inspector generals. Those of you who know about the inspector general program know that they're apolitical people who are looking for fraud, waste, and abuse and trying to keep others from breaking the laws, breaking the rules. They're running roughshod over the rule of law. You know, how about habeas corpus and you know, the right to have a trial, right? Or, you know, a hearing. They shut down Cyber Command, which is bizarre. Cyber Command got shut down and told they could not provide defense against Russia and China, and certainly no offense. And they fired the head of Cyber Command because some right-wing weirdo named Laura Loomer told Trump to fire the general. They dismantled the CIA. Who does that benefit? And they're purging the FBI and DOJ, Department of Justice, of career employees. Who benefits? Russia. USAID saved a lot of lives. I already told you about we're spreading the spreading HIV and drug-resistant TB. It's pretty important. And we're losing our image around the world as a generous nation. Back, we're here, there we are. We fired a lot more since then. 10,000 have been fired so far. And I know a lot of them. We leave an aid vacuum that's going to be filled by China. Gives diseases a greater chance to spread. We fed more people, we saved more lives, and made the world a much better place. They never proved any fraud. The richest people in the world are letting kids starve to death in Africa. I mean, seriously, not to mention closing food banks here and Meals on Wheels. Well, they're dismantling our intelligence agencies. What's the deal with that? It's our nation's first line of defense against foreign adversaries. The CIA, the FBI, the Cyber Command. It's also our defense against domestic threats. How can we lose our national security professionals?
The CIA is now offering buyouts to its entire staff, the latest move in President Trump's push to downsize the government. It follows a similar offer to civilian federal workers last month. About 20,000 of those workers have now accepted the buyout ahead of
A lot more
tomorrow's
now.
deadline amid reports of mass layoffs to come.
So cui bono, who benefits? Finally use my
ABC News has learned Elon Musk, leading the Department of Government Efficiency, has now moved beds into the executive office building next to the White House, allowing Musk and his staff to sleep there when working late. His staff reportedly includes people as young as 19 years old.
Moving into the White House, did we elect him? Do those
President Trump insists they're qualified.
They're very smart people.
Smarter than Trump, but you know.
Musk has also faced scrutiny after getting a hold of the Treasury Department's payment system, which disperses 90% of all federal payments, including Social Security and Medicare.
So I'm trying not to swear, even though I'm a sailor, you know, like those guys on the Snake Island. I'm a little upset. So here's my question for the audience at this point. Why would the President of the United States dismantle the CIA and FBI? Go ahead and digest that one for a minute. Why would he take those apart? Why would he force Cyber Command to stop defending against Russian and Chinese cyber attacks, which, of course, we've had many? Questions can go in the chat room, or you can raise your hand when we're done. Who benefits? More questions for you. By the way, how's your retirement plan going since all this tariff mishigas? I mean, it's crazy. You tried to call the VA? I've tried to call since they've had layoffs, and sometimes you can't get through for a couple of hours because no one's answering the phone. A lot of those veterans working at the VA were providing mental health services and other services for their fellow vets. I mean, this is tragic. And if your kids or grandkids have any special needs, or your neighbors, or even just people you don't know, why would you get rid of school lunches? And why would you get rid of Head Start? Why would you get rid of Meals on Wheels for people who really need it when we're a compassionate, generous, very wealthy country? You know, I'm in shock. I'm sure many of you are too. So I worry, is democracy doomed? Perhaps. But you know, only if we let it fail. So we're going to spend a minute or two talking about my opinion and what we should do, because do I have hope? Do I have fear? You know, I have both. And we've got a lot of damage control to do, as we'd say in the Navy. So everybody's got to be on board here. We need everybody's help. That's all hands on deck. We must revive a spirit of participation. Can't sit home on your couch and complain. We've got to encourage service. And I don't just mean national service. We're going to talk about service. There's all kinds of service. You got to participate in community events. Whatever it is, whether it's a parade, we'll talk about that. You got to express your political concerns. You should be emailing or writing your congressmen and your senators every day to tell them what upsets you. They need to know. We need to get them fired up more. You don't want to remain isolated. This is really important. I want to talk about this as well. It's indeed time to stand together and do something, and be strong enough to stand alone, be yourself enough to stand apart, but be wise enough to stand together when the time comes, as it says in this poster. And guess what? That time has come. What should we be doing? Stand up to lies and bigotry is step number one. You hear BS wherever you are, demand a response. Say, show me. I saw RFK Jr., you know, with all those worms in his head, said 1 out of every 3 kids going to the pediatrician's office has diabetes. Well, that's nonsense. It's actually 1 out of 260 or something like that. But like Trump, he just makes crap up and people buy it. So you need to fact check, look stuff up, try and figure out what's true and not true, and point it out. Don't spread rumors. If you're not sure it's true, just hold on and wait. And don't blame the other. You know, right now, Trump's getting a lot of mileage out of blaming people coming across the southern border who come here mostly to work. And, you know, they used to be standing out in front of my Home Depot, but I don't see so many of them anymore because they're scared. I want you to hear what J.B. Pritzker had to say about this. The governor of Illinois, brilliant guy, by the way.
The root that tears apart your house's foundation begins as a seed of distrust and hate and blame. The seed that grew into a dictatorship in Europe a lifetime ago didn't arrive overnight. It started with everyday Germans mad about inflation.
We have inflation.
And looking for someone to blame. I'm watching with a foreboding dread what is happening in our country right now. After we've discriminated against, deported, or disparaged all the immigrants and the gay and lesbian and transgender people, the developmentally disabled, the women, and the minorities, once we've ostracized our neighbors and betrayed our friends, after that, when the problems we started with are still there staring us in the face, what comes next? All the atrocities of human history lurk in the answer to that question. And if we don't want to repeat history, then for God's sake, in this moment, we better be strong enough to learn from it. My oath is to the Constitution of our state and of our country. We don't have kings in America, and I don't intend to bend the knee to one. If you think I'm overreacting and sounding the alarm too soon, consider this. It took the Nazis 1 month, 3 weeks, 2 days, 8 hours, and 40 minutes to dismantle a constitutional republic. And all I'm saying is that when the 5-alarm fire starts to burn, every good person better be ready to man a post with a bucket of water if you want to stop it from raging out of control.
What a great speech and a great speaker and a clear thinking man. So, man your post, join a group, do something. Play poker in a group, join a bridge group, mahjong, bunco, pickleball, horseshoes, whatever you like to do. Get out and do something somewhere at the park or the gym. Go to the gym. I talk and meet to people at the gym, and I meet others there pretty much at least once or twice a week. I make a new friend. We don't talk politics right off, but I kind of ease into it. And I don't talk climate change. I talk about the weather, and the wildfires and the floods. Join a hiking group or a garden group in your community. Do something to get out there with some other people. Don't be isolated. Be in a book club or attend a library event. I live in Lafayette. We have really good library events. I'm sure in your town as well. Everyone can do something in their community. You can volunteer at a food bank or a soup kitchen. You can sign up to give rides to those who cannot get to their medical appointments. My best friend's wife does that. She takes people around 1 day a week. You can volunteer, as I mentioned, the library, the community garden. Give politicians a nudge. They need to hear from you. Send emails, make phone calls, attend demonstrations. I'm not sure how effective they are, but it sure is interesting to watch how many there have been springing up. Go to town halls. I never went to a town hall. We should be having get out the vote drives because hopefully there's an election in 2022 where we can change the Republican Congress. You might want to monitor city hall meetings. Give that some thought. So I grew up with this inspiration. I am an optimist. I still believe in this inspiration. I went door to door at the age of 12, putting information and flyers in my Republican neighbors' mailboxes at the direction of my mother. We need inspiring leaders like this one to recapture the energy and optimism. So you got to have a taste. I told you I like old films.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I've never heard a better phrase. So as we get to kind of the conclusion of my structured remarks, and I see a couple hands raised and some questions in the chat room, I hope I've given you a lot to think about in terms of participating and doing something, manning your post, getting a bucket to fight this fire. I hope you're spurred into some sort of thought and action. But as always, those of you who know me,
Now are we done?
No, actually, there's one more thing.
always one more thing. One of the best decisions I ever made, which has a lot to bear on this subject, and the fact that I went to Ukraine, was I put on the uniform of my country. It was an amazing, unprecedented experience. I'm an American patriot who's proud to have served his country, but I was going to college and med school during the Vietnam War, and I wasn't real proud of what was going on, but I still felt I could serve my country and take care of those who might be wounded or injured. And I, that's like my favorite monument in Washington, D.C. Whenever I see that picture, You know, it's an amazing picture of the Marines raising the flag on Iwo Jima. Uh, you know, we haven't had a lot of those kinds of things lately, but here's a guy who is pretty brave. The president of Ukraine, his grandfather fought the Nazis. He's standing up. He looked a lot younger in this picture. He's aged a bit. He's had a tough 3 years. Amazing guy. He did not run. He fought. So being in the military, putting on a uniform makes me appreciate those people who stand and fight and become part of something greater than myself, for me and for them, you know, maybe serving their country. It's actually the real Statue of Liberty melting pot when you put on your uniform. You meet people from everywhere and different backgrounds I never expected I'd meet. You realize they have the same hopes and dreams for their kids. And you learn that they rely on you and you must rely on them. And one of the most fun things I ever did was I swore some of those guys in as citizens, because, you know, you get accelerated citizenship if you put on the uniform of the American military. Major General Dennis Leitch is a friend and colleague, belongs to the Eisenhower Media Group, and we communicate a lot. But I watched him give a talk last week. The audio is a little rough, but I think his story will resonate with this audience, and I think you will appreciate what he has to say. He's a real American hero.
So I'm 76 years old now. I have Parkinson's disease and I have leukemia. In October, I had a brain aneurysm operated on, and I had a heart attack in January.
Holy moly.
But here's the thing. I don't know how many days or weeks or months or years I have left in this world, but boy, I'm going to praise hell. I have the obligation to deal beside a grave at the military funeral and look in the eye of a sobbing spouse or parent, and the tightly folded flag and said, "We have a grateful nation." Those are things that are seriously in my mind. None of those soldiers, nor the millions who served in our military, sacrificed and died to support fascism. They sacrificed and died honoring their oaths in defense of democracy. I solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. An oath sworn by all government officials. I'm proud to stand with you. And I'm asking you today, will you stand with me? Stand against fascism. You stand for democracy.
The impressive guy. I'm proud to know him. He's had some health setbacks, but boy, that doesn't seem to stop it. So one more video. I can't help myself. Heavily edited, just like with General H. I had to cut out, you know, some of the stuff, but some of you may have seen this before. I need to always end on an optimistic note, and so I always count on Admiral McRaven to give me a little bit of hope for the future. If you want to change the world, you should make your bed. Some of you may know this one.
To pass SEAL training, there are a series of long swims that must be completed. One is the night swim. Before the swim, the instructors joyfully brief the students on all the species of sharks that inhabit the waters off San Clemente. They assure you, however, that no student has ever been eaten by a shark, at least not that they can remember. But you are also taught that if a shark begins to circle your position, stand your ground. Do not swim away. Do not act afraid. And if the shark, hungry for a midnight snack, darts towards you and summons up all your strength, and punch him in the snout, and he will turn and swim away. There are a lot of sharks in the world. If you hope to complete the swim, you will have to deal with them. So if you want to change the world, don't back down from the sharks.
Don't back down from the sharks. There's a little bit more here to share. It's a long.
Over a few weeks of difficult training, my SEAL class, which started with 150 men, was down to just 42. There were now 6 boat crews of 7 men each. I was in the boat with the tall guys, but the best boat crew we had was made up of the little guys, the munchkin crew we called them. The big men in the other boat crews would always make good-natured fun of the tiny little little flippers the munchkins put on their tiny little feet prior to every swim. But somehow these little guys from every corner of the nation and the world always had the last laugh, swimming faster than everyone and reaching the shore long before the rest of us. They out-paddled, outran, and outswam all the other boat crews. SEAL training was a great equalizer. Nothing mattered but your will to succeed, not your color, not your ethnic background, not your education, not your social status. If you want to change the world, measure a person by the size of their heart, not by the size of their flippers.
Good advice. Measure a person by the size of their heart. We know there's not much heart in the world.
Training is referred to as Hell Week. It is 6 days of no sleep, constant physical and mental harassment, and one special day at the Mud Flats. The Mud Flats are an area between San Diego and Tijuana where the water runs off and creates the Tijuana Sloughs, a swampy patch of terrain where the mud will engulf you. It is on Wednesday of Hell Week that you paddle down in the Mud Flats and spend the next 15 hours trying to survive the freezing cold, the howling wind, and the incessant pressure to quit from the instructors. As the sun began to set that Wednesday evening, my training class, having committed some egregious infraction to rules, was ordered into the mud. The mud consumed each man till there was nothing visible but our heads. The instructors told us we could leave the mud if only 5 men would quit. Only 5 men, just 5 men, and we could get out of the oppressive cold. Looking around the mud flat, it was apparent that some students were about to give up. It was still over 8 hours till the sun came up. 8 more hours of bone-chilling cold. The chattering teeth and the shivering moans of the trainees were so loud, it was hard to hear anything. And then one voice began to echo through the night. One voice raised in song. The song was terribly out of tune, but sung with great enthusiasm. One voice became 2, and 2 became 3, and before long, everyone in the class was singing. The instructors threatened us with more time in the mud if we kept up singing, but the singing persisted, and somehow the mud seemed a little warmer, and the wind a little tamer, and the dawn not so far away.
Never, never give up. Tonight's theme, for sure.
If I have learned anything in my time traveling the world, it is the power of hope. The power of one person, a Washington, a Lincoln, King, Mandela, and even a young girl from Pakistan, Malala. One person can change the world by giving people hope. So if you want to change the world, start each day with a task completed. Find someone to help you through life. Respect everyone. Know that life is not fair and that you will fail often. But if you take some risks, step up when the times are the toughest, face down the bullies, lift up the downtrodden, and never, ever give up. If you do these things, the next generation and the generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one we have today. And what started here will indeed have changed the world for the better.
It's up to us to change the world and fix this. Whenever I get down, I listen to his commencement address. It was fabulous. So I see some hands raised. I see some chat room. Let's go there. I see Ellis with a hand raised. Do you want to unmute yourself? I'm not sure if I can, but
Okay, I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yep, full speed ahead.
That's good. You put up the Latin who benefits, and I have to wonder about the billionaires, the Musks, the Thiels, the Saxes, and Zuckerbergs, and them. They seem to be backing Trump in this crazy position that he's taken. And do they want to live in a Mad Max world? Because that seems like what we're rushing to. A Mad Max world. Not that I'm a fan of that kind of movie, but why do they want their children, their grandchildren, to live in a world that is that out of whack? Right now, they live in the lap of luxury. They can have anything they want. And now they're playing into Putin's hand. What's in it for them?
You know, that's a great question.
Are these billionaires out of their minds?
Yes.
Maybe you can give me some insight into that. Why does it benefit them to go to play ball with Putin?
You know, it's a great question, and I am not an expert. You're a little bit outside my expertise as a surgeon or a Navy officer, but I think part of it is it's more power. You know, it's more money. You know, if you're already a billionaire, I guess what you need is a couple more billion. You know, I don't understand it either. You know, it's power, it's money, it's, you know, control. Why is Elon Musk in the White House? You know, I mean, he's there, you know, making trouble for the first 100 days. I think he's losing some of his oomph, but you know, it's pretty terrible. And so, you know, I just don't understand either why they want to do this, because you know they're tearing our country apart, and Trump's tearing our country apart. And so, you know, the fact that they're all putting money in, and they pretty much Trump everything that Trump would accuse the Biden administration of is stuff that Trump is doing, you know, taking money from foreign governments. You know, he's got a Trump meme coin that the first 200 or so people who buy his meme coin, the ones who spend the most money, get to have a dinner with him at Mar-a-Lago and a tour of the White House. You know, that's a bribe. That's extortion. It's pretty crazy. And I just
they took back the tour of the White House.
They'll get it. They'll get it. Yeah, no question.
Yeah,
So,
but that really doesn't get
crazy.
to the bottom of
So
this.
the TikTok guy is like one of the biggest donation guys because, of course, you know, he has business to conduct, right? He wants to get his TikTok thing fixed. Jackie, did I see your hand up? Did you want to throw a question at me?
Yes, Dr. Baker, thank you so much. And, you know, one thing, I want to say two things. First, you're absolutely right about making sure that when we post stuff, when you share stuff on social media, that it's accurate. I found myself even liking some stuff that after doing a little research, it was propaganda, right? On the left side, you know, imagery of Hitler, for instance, being AI'd into, you know, to say that this is similar to what the imagery coming from Trump, and come to find out that the post was an actual fake. So even on the liberal side, we have to be careful what we share and like, because if you share misinformation, you're not going to be trusted. So that's number one.
Great point.
And then two, the other thing I wanted to ask you is I noticed that it looks like maybe Zelensky has found the way to talk and deal with Trump, right? These leaders have to find a way to flatter his ego. And it looked like maybe this time at the Vatican, Zelensky was able to cut through and get into Trump's head a little bit. What do you say about that? I mean, how do you see or recommend that Zelensky deals with Trump? Is it flattering him?
That's a great question. I don't think there's anything that you can predict. I think Trump is erratic. I personally think he's a Russian tool. I think he's a Russian agent. I don't know why. Some of my intelligence friends, you know, have some suspicions why. Whatever Trump did at the Vatican last week, I don't know what he's going to do next week. It's more than just flattery. There's something else going on here. Why would he give up Ukraine? You know, why is he dismantling the FBI, the CIA, and Cyber Command? I mean, I think he's very erratic, and I have no clue. I don't think flattery is enough. I mean, this is a guy who's holding a raffle for dinner at Mar-a-Lago, for which he's collecting billions of dollars. This is a guy who got, what, $260 million donated to the Easter egg hunt and the inauguration so that he could use that money on projects that he wanted. I mean, this is totally an oligarchy. I don't know if it's Mad Max, you know, like Elvis said, but, you know, it's all about the money and the power, and Trump will do something different next week. So great question. I see Renee has a hand raised. If you want to unmute yourself and take a shot.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. I'm wondering if you know if there are any efforts to I don't want to say divert, but move equipment to our current partners in Western Europe that might then, through a third party, aid the Ukrainians. And the reason why I ask, and I guess it's wishful thinking, my son-in-law is an aerospace engineer who works out of San Diego for a company of which is the 100% of their business is in government contracts. He was involved in drone technology. And he said that his company had actually offered to provide sort of older drones and technology to the Ukrainians for $1, and then people in D.C., I guess the Defense Department shut that down and said, no, you can't do that. But I'm hoping that there's some way that military aid can be moved and end up in the right hands of the Ukrainians.
I certainly wish that was true, and it's wishful thinking on both our parts. The fact of the matter is we've cut off stuff to NATO. Most of the arms and things and the artillery shells and the Patriot battery systems for air defense, a lot of that stuff comes from the US, and we send it to Poland and Germany and places like that. And those countries have not been manufacturing it. We've been manufacturing it. They're waking up now, and they're going to have to figure out, can we build enough factories fast enough to put all these things into action where we need them, especially things that are complicated, like Patriot batteries to defend your airfields. That's a very, very big thing, and they're not going to be able to build that overnight. The 155 millimeter artillery shells that everybody uses in their weapons, nobody was making them in Europe. We've been making them for everybody. The only other place you can get them is from North Korea, which is a whole nother lecture we could talk about, which is why is North Korea sending troops and giving aid to Russia? The probably the poorest country on the face of the earth in terms of a lot of different parameters, and they're sending guys to fight along with their weapons. So yeah, I wish it were true. Once Trump stopped things going to Ukraine, he's stopped a lot of stuff going to NATO. And as your son says, they could offer to give it for free, and nobody would, they can't do it. So, great question. I just have to keep being hopeful, and I hope the Europeans can get their act together, because they're in grave danger, and they know it now. They've been relying on us for a long time. Now they're going to have to step up and do more. Jackie, your hand's up. Your turn. Here somewhere.
Sorry, I had myself muted. Yes. Thank you. You mentioned Trump being a tool of the Russians, and it brought back, the Steele dossier. What's your opinion, or some of the scuttlebutt you're hearing from the intelligence side? Is the Steele dossier real, factual? You have any thoughts on that?
Again, a little outside my area of expertise, but a great question. I think the most important thing is that, after the FBI did a deep dive on Russia doing stuff in the 2016 election and trying to influence things, which it turns out they were, and it was well documented. And then Bill Barr somehow managed to get his whiteout onto the computer screen and take out a lot of the stuff that he didn't want people to see. But the fact of the matter is that the head of the FBI had and his team had found that there's a tremendous amount of Russian influence and stuff going on to try and mess with the election and to support Trump. And so I don't know about the Steele dossier per se. I think an interesting book for all of you, and I'll send a link to Ellis he can send around, is the plot to Destroy America, written by Malcolm Nance. I read this like 10 years ago, and I'm like, relevant today. Russians have been in, up to their ears in our business, and Trump's letting it happen. So yeah, I don't know about the Steele dossier per se, but I do know that Bill Barr, because he was a Trump minion for a while until he realized he was supporting basically, Tony Soprano in the White House. He kind of soft pedaled the report about Russian influence. So Ellis has a hand up. Ask me a hard one.
Oh, this is definitely a hard one. I grew up in New York City and on the streets and had to deal with bullies as just about every kid who grows up in New York City or many other big cities. And what frequently happened is the bully would beat somebody up, and then somebody that got beaten up would show up with his big brother and push back on the bully. And it seems to me that when Russia first invaded Crimea, who was the president? It was 2006.
Barack Obama.
Barack Obama. What's it? No, it was 2014.
2014. Barack Obama was president.
Barack Obama. And why didn't Barack Obama just stand up to Putin and said, look, you're looking at the biggest guns on the planet, NATO and the United States. Cut this out. Don't do this. Get out of there now, or we're going to kick your ass. And what was going on then? Maybe it was below the radar, but what we need is somebody who can dominate Trump as a presidential candidate and somebody who could stand up to Vladimir Putin.
Right.
And he's not stronger than us. He just seems to have bigger testicles.
Well, you're absolutely right. Barack Obama missed his chance. They probably had a lot of low-level discussions. He was trying to act rationally. And you're right, he was dealing with a bully. What he should have done is immediately said, get out of there, or we're going to send NATO troops in to defend the border. I mean, they could have done that right off, and we wouldn't be where we are today. Yeah, he didn't stand up to it. I've always been a little disappointed. He was a tremendous man, and I admire him greatly. But I think that was one of his big failings. It's like each of our presidents had something that they fell on their face about. And, Joe Biden, who should have pulled out of the election run, a year ago before the election. How about Lyndon Johnson did all the civil rights stuff and everything else and, promoted the war in Vietnam. So, every president has goods and bads. And this was one of Barack Obama's bads. Otherwise, like I said, I admire him greatly. Yeah, we could have stopped it in 2014. We didn't. We should have. So, but he thought he was dealing with rational people who were open to discussion. You're right. They're bullies. And just like my friend Admiral McRaven, there's a reason I every once in a while watch his full commencement address, because I need a pick-me-up. I need somebody who says, stand up to the sharks, punch them in the nose.
I would love to see your friend Malcolm Nance for president. Yeah. He wouldn't take anything from Putin.
Yeah, all these guys are amazing patriots. Like I said, I met a lot of great people.
Other questions from members? Anyone? Raise your virtual hand.
No hand raised yet. So given that, I want you all to continue to hope. It's all hands on deck in the Navy. Do something every day, even if it's just send an email to your congressman. Try working for a positive change. Like I said, join a community group or whatever. And like this guy on Snake Island, big cojones, never, ever give up. The Ukrainians will never give up. So that's my final thought and my signal to the Russians.